Okay, so I'm going to talk you through the May exam and what's going to come up on the May exam. This exam is going to be 1 hour long, and it is going to try and assess you in both the coursework element and the exam element, and we're going to do that through some exam questions. So it's only going to focus on LO1, LO2, LO3 and LO4, and so when you're revising, make sure you're not revising anything outside of those learning objectives, as it will be pointless. And we're going to look at the following topics. So you need to understand and be able to recall the phases of the project lifecycle. You need to be able to recall the interactions of the project lifecycle. That means how one phase links to another phase and then on to the next phase, but doesn't necessarily link to another phase within that lifecycle. I know it sounds very confusing, but you should know what that means by now. You should know the inputs and outputs of the project lifecycle, and by that it means you're able to take each phase of the project lifecycle and state the inputs and the outputs for that phase according to the specification and according to the book, not according to the internet, and that's really key. You should be able to recall the legislation and the key elements of each legislation, and those legislations are the GDPR or Data Protection Act, Computer Misuse Act, Copyright Designs and Patents Act, and RIPA, the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, and you need to be able to understand which of those are going to be applicable to different contexts and also what the key elements are there. In the mock, a lot of you started going down the idea of General Computer Misuse Act because you combined GDPR and computer misuse, or you said Data Protection Computer Act, and you combine two things, and it really showed that you hadn't revised those pieces of legislation. So I'm really trying to find out here whether or not you've learned since your mock exam. You need to understand the computer threats and security issues. So this isn't just what the threats are and what the security issues are, but it's the impact of each threat. So what is the impact on a business or on an individual of getting some malware on their computer or social engineering? And you need to be able to understand each of the threats in the specification and be able to explain the impacts that they might have on a business or an organization and on an individual. You need to be able to talk about SMART targets. And what SMART stands for, so that's specific, measurable, achievable, realistic and time, and how those targets lead to better outcomes. You need to be able to understand the components of a Gantt chart and a PERT chart, and why you might use a Gantt chart over a PERT chart or a PERT chart over a Gantt chart when you're planning a project. You need to understand the information gathering methods and the application to certain scenarios. So this is what we've been looking at in LO3. There's going to be a little bit more in this exam, and it's going to be similar questions, but it's looking at why would a business use an interview, for instance, over a questionnaire, and they're the sort of things that you need to know firmly so that you're able to discuss them. You need to be able to discuss the data versus information and how data doesn't have context and information does, and that formula that you all should know by now of what makes information. You need to understand that the terms data validity, data reliability and data bias and how they can lead to certain outcomes. You need to understand the different storage methods and be able to recall on which storage method might be used for which scenario and which situation. So why might it be good to put something on the cloud over a hard drive for one person but not for another. You need to understand all the data types from LO3 that we've been working on, and you need to understand the different software types and their uses. So this is word processing, presentation software, database management software, so on and so forth, and you need to be able to say those application softwares when they might be used for a client or for a customer that's coming to you and saying, here's my problem, what software should I use? And that's something that a lot of you still get confused with in practice, and that comes from the coursework where you will automatically go and use PowerPoint to write a letter, but you need to understand when you should use word processing, presentation software, and most importantly you use those terms rather than the brand names of Microsoft Word and Microsoft PowerPoint. And then finally, you need to understand data storage methodologies and their applications. So this is how data storage works and how it stores onto a disk, for instance, how it stores on a magnetic disk, how it stores on flash memory. And that's quite a high level topic, but it is something that you have covered in the past 3 years. So that is your revision checklist explained for your May exam. It's really important that you go back to the specification and you look at the points here. You use the book, you use your notes, you use the videos on this page here to help you. And most importantly, if you have any questions, you come and ask them. You don't just ignore your questions. Thank you.